Welcome to Washington in Focus, your source for the week's top stories in the state of Washington. I'm Cole Lauterbach, managing editor for the Center Square Newswire service. This week, we'll be discussing the coming heavyweight bout for Washington's top office, a massive roadblock for the state's 2030 goal of all EV car sales, Seattle officials dusting off some old crime-fighting moves in some of the city's most dangerous neighborhoods, and Spokane's mayor riling up rural neighbors for shopping around areas to put her homeless population. That's ahead on Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach.
Knowledge is power, and you deserve to know what happens in your state government. That's why the nonprofit Franklin News Foundation is bringing you straight news journalism through the Center Square, reporting on state authorities and publishing stories that show where your money goes and who spends it. By supporting the Center Square, you can track politicians' use of taxpayer money and demand transparency from elected officials. This is how we can equip everyday Americans to hold their government accountable. Become a supporter of Franklin today at franklinnews.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach. Now, let's jump into the headlines. The November election will, for the first time in more than a decade, give Washington voters a chance to elect a non-incumbent governor. The field of more than 24 candidates was whittled down to 2 on Tuesday. Covering that race was Capitol correspondent Carlene Johnson. If people are waking up from a year-long coma, Carlene, let them know a little bit about who they're choosing this November.
Yeah, no surprise that we end up with Attorney General Bob Ferguson, the Democrat, going up against former King County Sheriff and U.S. Congressman, Republican Dave Reichert. So still, have a lot of votes to be tallied up. A lot of the counties kind of slow, it seems, getting their primary returns sent over to the Secretary of State's office. But as of Wednesday night, the vote total had Bob Ferguson getting 45%, Dave Reichert just over 28%. And then the two others in the race that, really stood any chance of pulling a good number of votes, Mark Mullet as of Wednesday night at 5.8% of the vote, he being the moderate Democrat, and then Semi Burt, who got the Washington party endorsement from the GOP state chair, receiving just under 10% of the vote. So certainly going to be Reichert v. Ferguson come November.
Right. Now, Ferguson has long been seen as kind of the heir apparent to now longtime Governor Jay Inslee, in terms of, kind of in the Hillary Clinton-esque way of saying it's his turn, I suppose.
Yeah, I kind of just felt like he's, served his time as in the state executive office of AG, and everybody knows him. Certainly has got the name recognition. You could argue Reichert does as well, but yeah, he certainly has all the money. It's coming in even from, all over the country, some big dollars flooding in. And now going into the general, he's going to have, the floodgates really open because as you said, Cole, this is the first time in a long time there's even a possibility of a Republican taking over, the governor's office. Not since Spellman has that happened. So been a long run of Democrats in that office.
And Spellman was a one and done Republican governor in the first place. Now, on the other side, Reichert, as you mentioned, wasn't the state's GOP pick. And there was some drama at the state convention where it ended up going. The endorsement went to Byrd. Reichert was there, but I think he eventually left, correct?
Yeah, he went there and then found out that, the way things were going to go and opted not to even give a speech at the convention. So that was kind of interesting. And we spoke to him a couple days later and he was still, pretty upset about how all of it went down. Everybody hoping now, according to GOP Chairman Jim Walsh, who I spoke with on Thursday morning, hoping now that everybody can just get in behind Reichert because he's going to need every single vote if he stands a chance against Ferguson. But right. when you add in the votes that went to Semi Byrd, getting, like I said, nearly 10% of the vote count as of Wednesday night, you add in those and then even get some of the Mullet supporters who might trend more actually toward Reichert, then there is going to be a real contest.
Right. And the important thing too is that when you talk about the difference between the vote totals between Reichert and Semi Bird, this wasn't one of those situations where the primary was pretty evenly split and It was 25% versus 22%, where there was an even amount of support for both, but one just kind of took it away. Reichert had about 2.5 times the number of votes than the GOP endorsed candidate. And those Byrd supporters now in question, there's a lot of derision online, half of which saying, well, we're staying home. But on the other side of it, there's others saying, well, look, this is our only chance to potentially get a Republican governor in a very blue state for the first time in, like you said, decades. I'm curious as to what you're hearing of people that are Byrd supporters as to whether or not, maybe this is just immediately after the primary grumbling and they'll eventually come around, or if they're genuine. Will they say, you know what, it's either my guy or we're burning it down?
Well, yeah, exactly. And when I spoke to Rep. Walsh on Thursday morning, he said, you know what, we are, at that point, not even 2 days from primary returns initially coming out. So at this point, you don't expect an endorsement from the Mullet camp for Reichert or Ferguson and for the Byrd folks, to get in behind Reichert. But he says it's going to happen. He's confident it's going to happen. And this was something interesting that Rep. Walsh said to me. He said the fact that voter turnout is so low for this primary, well below even what the Secretary of State's office told us they expected just last week. They think that's going to be a benefit for Reichert, because as you look at the county vote totals, number of voters versus, turnout versus registered voters in some of those counties, a lot of the count in central and eastern Washington fell far below what was anticipated. And that's the part of the state that is far more likely to want to come out and support a conservative candidate. So even though you've got the Democrats are always talking about voter turnout is going to, higher turnout is going to benefit them, Walsh said he expects quite the opposite come November.
Although, I mean, to be fair, in terms of to what Walsh said, you have central and eastern Washington that have even if you have an outsized turnout, it is still a very, very small portion of what Western Washington's Democratic strongholds are. Now, I want to ask about the possibility of Mullet endorsing Reichert. You said that they are politically not too far apart in the horseshoe, right?
Right. And as the senator in Legislative District 5, when, Mullet announced he was going to make a run for governor, that's kind of thrown things into some disarray in that district. But he has always been the moderate. In fact, he votes as many times on some of the big issues, with the Republicans over, his own party. He's always kind of that wild card. And so, from Walsh's perspective, he said that the Mullet supporters are going to align on some of the big issues in this, election, crime and the economy. He believes that those folks are going to align more with the Reichert camp. So as of yesterday, Mullet was out doing a great deal of media. Not yet. I don't know what day, whatever day it was this week. Mullet was out doing a great deal of media. And he said, I'm not ready to tell my supporters to go one way or the other. That day will come.
Fascinating. We'll be definitely watching the Mullet watch very, very closely. Thank you, Carlene. Washington, like a handful of other states, wants to start the decade with mandates that will only allow for new cars sold there to run off of electricity. This falls in line with Governor Jay Inslee's push for more green energy and minimizing fossil fuel use. Getting people in EVs is going to require a lot of charging stations across the state so that they're not seeing people stranded. Investigative reporter TJ Martinell has found that state officials aren't just grappling with getting more charging stations. They've got another hurdle. What's the latest, TJ?
Well, there's a new study that was put out by Harvard showing that 1 out of every 5 charging attempts at a electric vehicle charging port throughout the nation fails. And that includes Washington State.
Fails. When you initially told me this, I had a lot of questions, and the first one was define fail.
It means that when somebody's trying to charge with that port, the charge doesn't occur. So,
I mean, it might be, it just doesn't happen, or there's overload, or, maybe there's full. I guess there's a bunch of different reasons for this, but it doesn't necessarily mean that 1 out of every 5 charging stations in the country, I guess, is for some reason, say vandalized or damaged or not working at all. They just say they couldn't charge for one reason or another.
Right. People could be trying to charge from the same port, and it just occurs because it's like if it's at a key spot regionally where it's the only charging port in the game around that area and it doesn't work, then that means that you could have 100 people try and charge at the same port and would fail. Whereas there's some charging ports where it's always operable.
Now, did the Harvard people elaborate on the causes for these failures, which is alarmingly high?
There's a couple of reasons. One is there's what you would call vandalism or copper wire thefts, but there's also one thing they noticed that no one's maintaining these charging ports or keeping track of whether or not they're operable.
Unbelievable. I mean, I guess it's different with the private or they say Tesla chargers where those are connected online, and if one breaks down, Tesla gets notification and they send one of their service people out and they fix it, and it's back working and functional in a matter of hours. This study was done focusing on not privately owned, say, gas stations that have charging stations out back or something. These are municipal and government run chargers, correct?
Yes, these are public charging ports that the study focused on. It did not focus on private sector charging ports.
And when we talk about, you touched on copper thieves, Washington has an outsized problem in terms of, compared to nationally, in terms of other states. Copper thieves have hit these charging ports and charging stations in Washington pretty hard.
Yes, this is considered ground zero for copper wire thefts, and it's been causing a huge amount of problems for the state trying to keep the EV charging infrastructure intact.
Right. Now, you also looked at a draft report from the state of Washington talking about this. They already, obviously, by getting to the 2030 benchmark, that's already a high goal. But now the state is saying in this draft report that they said they need to overbuild.
Yeah, because the estimate for the number of charging ports, public charging ports, assumed that every single one of them would be functional. And now they're realizing, if this is the failure rate, we're going to need even more just to be able to meet the expected demand as a result of this mandate.
How much money are they talking about with this, TJ?
Well, this draft proposal is for funding requests that they're going to put through the state legislature. They're seeking $103 million for the 2025-2027 operating budget, and $90 million of that would be to fund the electric vehicle rebate program that started earlier this month. So it's got funding for this current biennium, but it's going to need more ongoing. And that's for this. This is for a specific section of the whole state electric vehicle transportation electrification effort. So they may be requesting other amounts of money for charging ports, but they're trying to build they're going to have 3,030 public fast charging ports for light duty vehicles by 2025. And there are currently 1,283. And to meet that, they're going to have the private sector build some as well.
Godspeed. Okay. Thank you, TJ. County and city attorneys along the West Coast bought into a criminal justice reform movement in recent years that focused on treatment and leniency over incarceration. The thought was that people aren't getting helped in prison for minor crimes or drug use. But after public outcry over what's become rampant drug use, homelessness, and to a lesser extent, sex trafficking, some of those elected officials are proposing to crack down in different ways. Seattle reporter Spencer Pauly covered an announcement from the city's attorney about a focused effort to keep even potential offenders out of certain areas of the city. What's the idea with this new proposal, Spencer?
Yeah, so Seattle City Attorney Ann Davison recently announced her Stay Out of the Drug Area legislation, or as she refers to it, SODA. And what SODA does is prohibits offenders from entering a designated zone if they have committed a drug-related offense in that such zone. Now, I think immediately questions are going to be raised about how enforceable this bill is. I mean, including the fact that Seattle Police Department has such a staff shortage that is causing response time for even priority one calls to increase. So that's kind of some of the things here we'll be tracking with this legislation, whether or not it'll be passed.
Yeah, that was the first thing I thought when I read your story was, how on earth is the police department that has the lowest officer per citizen resident ratio in the country going to enforce a new law, ordinance, rule that says you cannot be seen even in this area if you have a prior offense? I mean, I know that there are and you've talked about this before. It's serial offenders. Spokane as well has this, where it's an outsized proportion of the crime, property crime, drug use is perpetrated by a very small population. So there could be ways in terms of, if cops know these people and they know they're the repeat offenders and they just see them in these areas, I could see where that would be feasible. But these are not new ideas, right, Spencer? This one was repealed, 4 years ago?
Yep, back in 2020, the city council at the time unanimously repealed a drug lowering law, citing impacts to people of color. Now, this caused kind of a decriminalization of drug use on public property. And I think we have seen some results stem from that, where we're seeing increased drug usage in Seattle's, the heart of Seattle, where we're seeing tourists, where we're seeing downtown activity. So, we can look back at that. But that back then, the city council was more progressive, including socialist Kashama Sawant, who was on that council. Now, she has gone with much of the city council at that time with a more moderate cast of council members. And I think that's why City Attorney Ann Davison is proposing this now, because she probably has more of force in the city council to pass something like this.
Yeah, Nelson being one who has wanted to crack down on the homelessness and the crime downtown. Notably, also she was the one who stepped back and said we need to revise the city's Uber Eats food delivery charges because of quite the backlash over that, and it was affecting businesses and the delivery drivers. So Spencer, now there's two areas, right? Are they downtown? Describe where those two the proposed areas are located.
Yeah, so the SODA zones, I will refer to them as, includes a part of the downtown area. It's notorious and it's hard to miss. This is probably where people will think of Seattle as like what it is now, as like the Mad Max Fury Road of the country. It's this little area here, but also just south of downtown is the International Chinatown District, and that's where a lot of drug use is also being done, and it's affecting small businesses of people and who are in that community. And so those are the two zones that will be part of this legislation if passed. Now, important question here is McStabby's included in one of these SODA zones? That is the heart of this zone, I would say. I think
zeroed in, huh?
Yeah, that would be the central spot right there. And to add to that, Cole, this, whether or not this legislation will have any kind of impact, this is a zone that is, very dangerous, and also is just a glaring mark on the city. This is 2 blocks away from Pike Place, which is a huge tourist attraction. And people who go past McStabby's on 3rd Avenue can take it all the way to the Seattle Center to where the Space Needle is. So when you have people visiting and you're just going to keep reflecting these ideas that Seattle is, we're full of drugs and, violence and crime. And, as someone who lives in Seattle, there are definitely spots in Seattle that are safe. But when you put everyone in the tourist area where you're seeing it, it's hard to defend. So I think that's one thing there. And, last time I was even downtown, I went to get my bike fixed, and when I went inside, this is on 3rd Avenue, and someone came in and asked the lady, as I was trying, make us, purchase something. He goes, "Are you a vampire?" And it was very uncomfortable, and they had to escort this man out. So you're seeing a lot of issues here. So if this person gets caught again under this legislation, maybe he'll be like, "Hey, I can't come back here anymore." But we'll see.
Wow. I mean, you never did elaborate. Are you a vampire?
She didn't. Yeah.
Okay.
It was towards the cashier.
Just for clarity's sake. I just need to make sure. Thank you. Right. Appreciate it, Spencer. Good luck, covering that one. It should be interesting to see how that plays out and works its way through the, ordinance system there in Seattle. Spokane Mayor Lisa Brown recently declared a state of emergency regarding the city's homeless population. She's now in the process of shifting those homeless to new housing. And now it seems she might be shelter shopping outside the city limits, according to some rumors that I guess they're fighting back on. Now, Eastern Washington reporter Tim Klauser covered the reaction from this field trip of sorts. First off, what's the rumor, Tim?
Yeah, Cole. Well, the rumor has it that Mayor Brown visited the Pine Lodge facility last Thursday to consider it as a potential location for her proposed housing navigation center. Now, the Pine Lodge facility used to be used as a women's correctional facility, but it's since been largely abandoned and deteriorated. So the issue here is that the facility is in Spokane's neighboring town of Medical Lake, which has a significantly smaller population and doesn't have nearly the same issue with homelessness as, say, Spokane does. And the people there are concerned that if the facility goes there, then Spokane's essentially just pushing their problem off onto another smaller rural town that doesn't even have the issue to begin with.
Right. Now, did the mayor confirm or deny the rumor? She did eventually speak out about this, correct?
Yeah, so the mayor came out afterwards, and I think it's safe to say that this is a false rumor, but there is some added context to this. Brown did say that she visited the Pine Lodge, but she did so to see if it could be used for extra detention space amid shortages at the county's detention facilities, jails. However, regardless, the building was in a dire state and isn't really suited for that purpose regardless. But the Medical Lake Mayor, Terry Cooper, and Spokane County Commissioner Al French claimed that it had to be true that she was looking at it as a homeless shelter because there was emails from the Homeless Coalition asking if she considered it as a location. She pushed back saying that, she never even responded to the emails or requests to meet. However, Councilmember Jonathan Bingle did. He's a conservative on the council, one of two in the progressive city. And he even told me on the phone that day that he was the one that initially floated the idea. With that said, though, he said it's not his intention to push the problem off on someone else. Councilmember Bingle, the neighborhood he lives in has the highest concentration of homeless people in the city. He said that he just wants to find a regional solution to this regional issue.
And now the rumor that was, addressed eventually solicited quite a reaction from the locals in the town and the county as well.
Yeah, as I said, the Medical Lake Mayor and the Spokane County Commissioner, they were putting out statements, and they also held a press conference on Saturday that actually generated quite a crowd. And they were not happy. And Bingle told me, this is all just a big misunderstanding, but it did further the distrust in Brown for a lot of people, even outside of her own city, even if this was sincere in her action to seek it out as a potential detention facility. But regardless, the county sheriff came out the next day. He was at the press conference and said that he thinks that the mayor is lying. He said that the same day that the mayor went and visited the facility, she actually met with the sheriff and over a dozen other local leaders about potentially reviving the failed jail tax that failed last November that would have solved the shortage issue. He said if the mayor was actually looking for solutions to this problem and she planned on visiting that facility that day for that very purpose, you'd think that she would mention that in the meeting. But he says that she didn't say anything.
And this kind of is a continuation as to what you mentioned of a growing sense of bad blood between the county and the city, which seems like a first because the city of Spokane and the county, Spokane County, have typically worked really well together.
Yeah, they do have quite the history of collaboration, but it seems like it's taking a turn, especially in the last year, or a little less than a year since Brown was elected last November. It was that same election that she was elected that failed tax measure that would have funded the jails. Those both concurred at the same time. See, the Mayor Brown didn't support the tax measure, despite her getting 15% or so of that revenue. But now she's pushing for her own tax measure that's going to really harm the county's ability to fund future jails. So the sheriff says that if the mayor isn't lying, she's at least moving away from this history of collaboration and choosing to take her own route, which is proving to be somewhat more dangerous in his eyes.
Yeah. High drama in Eastern Washington. Thank you, Tim. And a big thank you to our journalists for sharing their stories. Stay up to date with these and more at thecentersquare.com. I'm Cole Lauterbach, and until next time, this has been Washington in Focus.